Hey guys, Jordan here. In this video I'm going to be talking about shooting single exposure for real estate photography. So let's get into it. Alright, so if this is your first time on my channel, consider subscribing if you're into real estate photography, as I put out consistent videos on the topic of real estate photography. It's what I've been doing for 10 years. So let's get into the question from another video, right? So I made a video about batch merge HDR in Lightroom for real estate photography, and I demonstrate how to do that. But I think I mentioned that I sometimes, or a lot of times, I'll be shooting single exposure. So it says, please elaborate, or AC007 says, please elaborate on why you've been doing a lot of single exposure. I thought single exposure should only be used for small rooms like a laundry room, closet, or small bathroom. Thanks. One thing that a lot of real estate photographers focus on that's really not that important for most houses, in my opinion, is the most crisp windows, right? Yes, we do like to see a little bit of detail. We don't want it completely blown out there, but at the same time, we don't care that it is super crisp or that you can see every detail, every trash can, every car out there. You know, in my opinion, sometimes that's actually a bit distracting when you're really focused on the interior. And probably one of my pet peeves is that when you see photography where it looks much better outside than even the inside. So you're kind of missing the boat on what's important here. What are they selling? Are you selling the trash can across the street? Or are you selling, you know, the house itself? Make the house look as good as possible. But that's not the case for all houses. Some houses, the views are what really helps sell the house. So for those, definitely do multiple exposures or do lighting. We offer different types of photography based on customer needs, right? So the majority of our customers, they're not selling views out of their windows. You know, it could be $200,000 or $300,000 property. So we don't focus on that so much, right? So that's where single exposure comes in, right? With newer cameras, right? So even if you're shooting a single exposure, darker exposure, you can get a lot of information from the shadows. Now, if you're having a lot of blown outs, I can't remember what zebra setting that I would set, that knowing that I'm not gonna have any detail in there. It might be 70 or 90, I can't remember. But if windows, so I wanna make sure you get some detail in the windows, right? So you can bring down the exposure, well, shoot it. With Sony, if you're shooting like a low ISO setting, you can boost shadows, boost exposure, and bring and get a lot of detail without a bunch of noise in the shadows, right? So with these newer cameras, you know, this shooting single exposure wasn't that great of a result in the past because of that, right? There would be a lot of noise, or just got a bunch of weird colors in the shadows. But now that you can shoot ISO 50 or ISO 100 and boost shadows without a bunch of negative impact, while still, because you shot at a lower exposure value, you're still getting some detail in the windows. And even if you're shooting like a zero, like exposure value 0, you can still get a decent amount of information. But it really just depends on your camera's light metering, if it's super dark in a house and super bright outside, right? So if the difference is vastly different, then, you know, you might have trouble getting some information from outside the window. So anyways, so yeah, single exposure. I'll go over, I think some people wanted me to make a video on how I shoot and how I edit, or the camera settings or whatever on single exposure, but it's pretty interesting. And actually I got more into the idea because of somebody on the channel mentioned it. So then I started to test it, and I was getting a pretty dang good result with it. Now, my single exposure shooting is ambient, right? You can shoot flat. I mean, there's different variables. So from an efficiency standpoint, the reason why single exposure is appealing, because it can eliminate a lot of the variables, right? I can shoot with the monopod. It doesn't matter if my camera is moving or not. My camera settings is no slower than I think 1/20th or 1/30th of a second. So it's a quick shutter speed. But anyways, the exposure value that I like right now for single exposure is -0.7. You can go lower than that, and you can adjust it if even windows is very important for a particular shot. Even if I'm shooting that, I can manually get like a negative 3.0 exposure value as well, and blend those together if you need it. It's really quick, but for most shots, yeah, negative 0.7 works really well. I still like aperture setting 7.1. I don't want to get too deep into camera settings here, but yeah, so you would shoot single exposure. At the end of the day, it's about how much time, effort, and energy do you need to put in to deliver a acceptable or a good result to your customers, right? It's not all about what you want as a photographer, or what, you know, you might want the crispest windows for every single house or trailer that you're shooting, but for me, it's not that important. I think you can definitely get a great result while not having to blend exposures and do all these adjustments, just single exposure. And from my perspective, using a monopod allows me to move around in a house, and I don't have to fiddle with the straightening out the thing, because you can just move your monopod around and get it straight. So anyways, what I love about real estate photography is it's not so much of creative art, but it's a lot of like math and angles, right? That's pretty much all it is. Tripod height, and with the monopod, it makes it so easy to just extend. You can set it with your hand, look at your composition, lower, you know, release one leg, boom, and it is steady. And so yeah, I really love shooting with it. It's just, for me, it's fun to shoot efficiently. I don't know why I find shooting efficiently real estate photography so much fun. It's a lot more fun than let's bring out all the lights, even though I do sometimes, and I know how. Bring out the tripod, all the lights and this and that, and you get some really nice looking shots. I'm very surprised at what results I can get on a monopod, single exposure. You know, I would say not as good of a result, but quite good of a result. And yeah, but a lot of that just depends on the lighting of the house as well too. So anyways, thank you so much for your question / comment. Yeah, so small, yeah. You know, single exposure, I will, before I end this, to your point, single exposure, bathrooms, laundry rooms, or I would just say rooms and areas that don't have like vastly differing exposure values, like windows, super bright, interior, super dark. This would be exterior photos. There's not a whole lot difference, right? Yeah, small bathrooms, right? Sometimes there's no windows, or any small room that has no windows, or if you're facing inside and there's not that element, there's really no reason to have multiple exposures. But we train our team to do both, right? I think they're doing, it's easiest to train your team to do one thing, right? And you know, triple exposures. The way I shoot isn't the way that we necessarily train our entire team to shoot. It's just kind of my personal preference as a real estate photographer. I still find it very fascinating and fun even 10 years later. So anyways, I'm gonna stop talking, but if you got value, hit the like button and subscribe if you're into real estate photography, and we'll see you guys on the next one.